Hello, everybody. Welcome to the University of Melbourne. My name's Michael Breer, and I'm a Professor of Engineering here. I'm also the Director of the Melbourne Energy Institute, so I welcome you on behalf of the University of Melbourne to this evening's event. Before we kick off proceedings, I would like to acknowledge that this evening we are gathered on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung and Bunurong people, who have been custodians of this land for thousands, tens of thousands of years, and we acknowledge and pay respects to their elders past and present. And we also have some distinguished guests coming from other parts of the world where there are other lands with other peoples, and we acknowledge their traditional owners as well, and welcome our guests from overseas and interstate and outside Greater Melbourne. We're privileged to partner again with our friends at the Grattan Institute. We used to do this a lot more pre-COVID, but anyway, COVID did lots of things to lots of people, and has also changed how often we do hold these events. But they're great events, and it's great to see such a tremendous turnout tonight. This evening we have two senior representatives from the US and Australian energy agencies to discuss the US and Australian journeys on the road to net zero. I'll first read out the biography and welcome our guest from the United States, Alison Clemens, who's a Commissioner of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Commissioner Clemens joined the FERC in December 2020 following a range of public and private sector roles in energy law and grid monetisation, modernisation, not monetisation. There's a Freudian slip. Modernisation policies. Prior to her current role, she worked at the Energy Foundation, Good Grid LLC, and the National Natural Resources Defence Council. Alison began her legal career in private practice at Troutman Sanders and Chadbourne Park. Over the course of her career, she's included her clients have included utilities, independent power producers, developers, lenders, non-profits, and philanthropies. Commissioner Clemens has also served as an expert in federal energy-related matters at several capacities, including as a member of the National Academies of Sciences Committee on Grid Resilience, and as a clinical visiting lecturer at Yale Law School in Connecticut. She holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Michigan, which is a wonderful school in Ann Arbor, and a Juris Doctor from the George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C. I'll welcome Alison to come up and speak first. Welcome, Alison.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's really nice to be here. I'm a little intimidated by a group of people who know a lot more about the area we're sitting in than I do. So it's really generous of you, Michael. Thank you. And Tony, thank you. It's nice to meet you, Commissioner, and to have the chance to compare notes and talk about the energy transition as it relates to two really different parts of the world. But I think what I've been finding today, we've been in Australia since Monday morning. We've been in Sydney for 2 days and just got here. So we picked up the rain in Sydney before having a beautiful day here today. And already we've been meeting with some of the regulators, the market bodies here, and finding that while there are lots of differences between what's going on in the energy sector in the United States and Australia, there are also a lot of similarities. The challenges we're facing at a high level are similar. We're facing, threats to kind of our way of life, to our economy. We've got evolving cyber and physical threats to our transmission system, to the backbone of our economy, the poles and wires that power everything we do. We have extreme weather, different kinds of extreme weather, but nonetheless, we're both operating grids that weren't designed to manage the stresses that are coming down on it. I'll talk a little bit more in our case in the US about the extended extreme cold and extended extreme heat that has a lot of impact on our systems. We're at a time of load growth. After decades in the US of flat or decreasing demand for energy and electricity, we are now seeing, thanks to, and I'll talk some about legislation passed in 2022 called the Inflation Reduction Act, we've had re-onshoring of manufacturing in the US. We certainly, like you all, are experiencing load growth from data centers, and whether or not it be for cloud computing, for the increasing demands of artificial intelligence. But in any case, there's more power needed. And at the same time, all of this is going on. The markets and state policies, largely in the US, now federal policy, have been driving a changing resource mix. And that's happening at a pace that, while manageable, is really unprecedented relative to what was for 80 plus years a pretty static system, operated, as you all know. For those of you who think about grid, how the grid operates all day, in the same way, kind of understood, very predictable and safe. We're in a different moment. So we have all of these factors spinning around us, and we're trying to figure out what to do with that uncertainty while moving our system to a cleaner but continually reliable and affordable modern energy system. So I think we both face different versions of those same challenges from across the world. And in the United States, we rejoined the Paris Agreement in 2021 to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, with goals of reducing them 50 to 52% by 2030, and of course, being net zero by 2050. And I'll talk a little bit about the various parts of the US government that have a role to play, but at the federal level, where I sit, it's a really kind of a whole of government approach. You have the administration, President Biden, and then you have the cabinet agencies. In the executive branch, you've got the Department of Energy, which plays a very big role, the Environmental Protection Agency, which plays a very big role, the Department of Transportation, increasingly. And then because of the threat of climate change and the impacts of climate change, you also have the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of State from an international perspective. So it's a whole of government approach. Of course, it would be nice if the politics across the United States all lined up to match that whole of government approach. And as you know, that's not the case. But my little part of the world is an independent federal economic regulator called the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. How many of you have ever heard of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission? Oh, wow, this is amazing. I have my colleagues here with me, 3 of my colleagues from our agency, and it's to be in Australia and have half the room raise their hand is pretty encouraging when it comes to the conversation. So I'm going to focus. So when we think about what is the U.S. whole of government approach to get to these Paris targets, to get to the current administration's greenhouse gas reduction goals, they have a 5-part plan, and it will sound familiar to you. The first part is, I was practicing it on the way here, so I'm not going to have to do it. The first part is to get the grid right. That's the part that I focus on, to make sure that the backbone is clean electricity and to the provision of clean and affordable power. The second is to get rid of the carbon emissions in the end uses, right? Industry, transportation, and buildings. The third is to increase energy efficiency. The fourth is to decrease non-carbon dioxide GHGs like methane, nitrous oxide. And the fifth is to scale up removal. The base is the grid. That is the starting point, and that's the piece that I focus on. And so what is FERC's role in all of this, this government approach? We are an economic regulator. I met with the chair from AEMC yesterday and staff from there. Do a lot of what AEMC does, some of what AER does, some of what AEMO does, and I'm probably missing a little bit, even a little bit, I think, of ACCC. So we're one agency, we're about 1,500 people responsible for the transmission system, the rates of the transmission service, and the planning and cost allocation of new transmission development. We're responsible we have jurisdiction over the operation of the wholesale markets. So of course, as you know, that's the sale from generators to the load serving entity or and then of course we have 50 states with jurisdiction that starts from the load serving entity to the customer, to your home or your business. We have jurisdiction over natural gas pipeline approvals. We have jurisdiction over hydro licensing, non-federal hydro licensing. And we have enforcement authority on the electric side and the gas side. and we have other ancillary authorities. So it's not totally neat and coordinated, but there is a whole bunch of different pieces of the puzzle for which we have responsibility. And within that, we're saying, okay, we're in this moment, we're facing these challenges. What do we as a commission do? We are not climate regulators. We are not environmental regulators. Our job is to ensure that the rates are fair for customers, our legal standard is just and reasonable, and that the decisions we make are in the public interest. It's from an economic perspective. Of course, when you think about what's in the public interest, when you think about the environmental reviews that come along with or some emerging authority we have over the transmission, climate has impact on those decisions, right? And so it's hard to ignore it. It's hard to ignore it from any agency in the US government or anywhere else, but it does come into play, although that is not our role as an economic regulator. So when I think about, okay, how do we get at this? How do we get at this grid piece of it? In my mind, we do the easiest, cheapest, nearest term things first, while we are then working on the harder, slower, and more expensive set of solutions to evolve that grid to that modern grid that we need to have today. And I'm going to talk about some of the things that FERC's been doing and that we continue to try and get done related to the near term, cheaper, easiest things. None of it's easy, but relatively easy, all the way up to the most expensive, most difficult things to do. And I failed to mention, for those of you who don't know what FERC is, we're a 5-member commission. We have the jurisdiction I mentioned, but we have 5-year staggered terms. So we are from both the Democratic and the Republican Party. We're appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And the way that it typically works is that when you have a term up for a Democrat and a term up for a Republican, you can pick 2 new ones, send them through the Senate together, and by small miracles, you can actually get through that process. So you have 5 people deciding on every decision that gets made at the commission, whether it be a generic rule, like I'm going to talk about, or individual parties can also bring concerns to the commission. So there can be a contested proceeding between an interconnection customer, a generator who wants to hook up to the grid, and the utility that owns that piece of grid, for example. So the near-term cheap stuff, let's get more juice out of our existing system. The electricity grid is a really inefficient machine. It's an impressive, giant, feat of engineering, but it's also run really inefficiently because historically, the way that the system was planned was for those peak moments across the year, whether it be that hottest day in July in the US or December here, when you have to turn on the air conditioners all at the same time for extended periods of time. And so there's more power demand than there is the rest of the year or the rest of the season, or the opposite, right? In the winter at that really cold time when everyone's turning their heaters on and trying to stay warm. That's the time you need the most power on the system. And so historically, when you've got these big gas plants, coal plants, in the US, nuclear plants that are easy to control, or at least predictable to control, you build enough so that you can meet that highest demand moment, and then you add a little more, right? You get a little bit of extra reserve just for safety reasons. Well, that's not how the system works anymore. We have a lot more types of resources on the system. You've got solar that shines during the day, wind that blows at different times, harder during some seasons than the other seasons. You've got rooftop solar, and you've got customers who are in industries, manufacturing facilities who are willing to ramp up their power when the system doesn't have a lot of demand on it, and then cut back and not use power at the times that there is a lot of system demand during those really hot or cold moments, for example. And so that we have these transmission lines, these poles and wires that a lot of the time during the year, nothing's really flowing through it because we're just waiting for those. It's built big enough for those hot and cold moments. But we can get more out of that system with today's technologies, smarts, and the increases in lots of practices and procedures by engineers around the country. So we focus on things called, in the States, grid enhancing technologies. For those of you who are really in the weeds on this stuff, advanced power flow controls, topology optimization, dynamic line ratings, ways to understand that we can take this kind of crickety old machine and turn it into a more dynamic system that can then save us money from building new transmission, right? And so the first thing to do is get this software and hardware deployed onto our system and make it run more efficiently. That's going to allow a lot more new resources to get on the grid, a lot more renewable resources in particular. There's a study in a region in the middle of the US called the PJM region. It's the Mid-Atlantic states. There's 13 states. And there's a study that suggests that we could get 6.6 gigawatts, 6.6 gigawatts of new wind and solar on the system without any new material transmission investment, just by deploying this hardware and software that can make our existing system more efficient. That's pretty powerful. And, you know, people like to fight about the credibility of a study. So if you think that's too optimistic, cut it in half. It's still a really wildly large amount of new power we can get onto our system without the more expensive transmission investment. I'm going to talk about two more pieces of this puzzle now, like kind of more, maybe the more medium term, still urgent, but easier to get at than the bigger transmission investment. And that's interconnecting resources to the system, improving the way that we interconnect resources to the system. So in the United States, we have about 1.3 terawatts of is that right? 1.3 terawatts online of existing generation today. The majority of it is thermal, you know, gas, coal, nuclear, but increasingly we're getting wind, solar, storage, some combination thereof coming online. We have more than double the amount of resources in line to hook up to the grid than we do operating on the grid today. Now, not all of those projects are real, right? Because the system wasn't designed to deal with interconnecting lots of resources all at once. You've got a lot of wind and solar battery developers who'll put 5 interconnection applications in line because they're just not sure how the costs are going to work out, or they're just not sure if they're going to get through the process on any of them. So let's say we have, you know, not 2.6 terawatts in line, we have 1.5. It's still kind of an overwhelming or staggering number of resources that want to be providing fuel-free, right? So, zero carbon, fuel-free resources, but can't hook up to the system. So our commission has issued a rule, a regulation that is intended to help solve this problem. It used to be every once in a while you'd have a gas plant hook up, right? Near the communities it was going to serve, no big deal, you figure it out. But that's not the reality. The resource mix has exploded. There are a lot more that want to get online, and we need to solve the problems related to helping them get going. The kind of additive issue with that problem is that a lot of the thermal resources, coal in particular, are less and less economic, right? They're not winning in the market. And so if they're retiring as uneconomic resources, or in some cases, they're retiring because the EPA, one of those other cabinet agencies I described, have put out regulations that make it uneconomic to operate. They'll say, yeah, instead of retrofitting our units to satisfy these clean air standards, we'd rather just retire the unit. As those are going away, you know, the biggest way that we solve for that problem in a time when there's increasing demand is to accelerate the addition of the new stuff that wants to get on. And so that's one of the things that we're really focused on. We have a lot more work to do there, but it's a tough problem, and it's one that, in talking to folks here, many are familiar with and experiencing as well. And then finally, if you go from making the existing system more efficient, make it easier to hook up the new resources, you still need a bigger grid, ultimately. That's the harder, most expensive, longer-term needs. I know probably Sally will talk about the Integrated System Plan. Is that what the ISP stands for? And how you're thinking about it in Australia. In the US, the federal government, FERC, has responsibility for the planning, the future planning of transmission, as well as who's going to pay for that transmission. But it's the states, it's the 47 of the 50 interconnected states who decide whether or not to site that transmission line. So it's a bit of a morass from even on a good day. But the problem is what we haven't been doing in the US is looking forward 20 years and planning, right? We make a joke to say, if you're going to go on a family vacation, are you better off planning a year in advance so that you can get the cheapest airline tickets, the best reservations at restaurants, you can get tickets to the play, all of these, your family can get excited about it. But if you wait till the month before, everything's going to be a lot more expensive, harder to get done. You're going to miss out on the benefits, right? It's the same way with the transmission system. We have to be looking forward. We know the future is uncertain, but we need scenario-based planning to try and harness that uncertainty and say, what does the future look like in the United States? What kind of background grid are we going to need? And let's start planning for it now so that we can choose the most cost-effective ways to get there. We're not always going to be right. We're not going to be right about what we need in year 15 when we're planning right now, but we have to start doing it to try and start to narrow that type of uncertainty. So that's something that we're focused on right now at the Commission. How do we require long-term planning that right now isn't happening in regions across the country so that we have a proactive way of ensuring reliable, affordable electricity without getting all these resources stuck in line waiting to hook up to the system? There's a few other things that we think about in that planning context. In addition to looking forward 20 years, which we're hoping to require utilities to do, the transmission owning utilities to do, we want to make sure that they're considering all of the benefits of new transmission. So for example, if you're an East Coast state, New Jersey, and you have offshore wind, and you want to, as New Jersey, build this transmission line to hook up your offshore wind into the Atlantic Ocean, you're willing to pay some amount of money as New Jersey because you want that wind to get hooked up to match your policy goals. Well, here's the thing. That offshore wind is going to blow really hard in the winter when it's really cold, and the thermal system is having problems. When things get really cold, just like for us, they don't work as well, right? You have a gas plant running and it freezes. It has a mechanical failure, or the production of the gas itself is getting frozen up, and so there's not enough supply. And the home heating that's done with gas is increasing because it's really cold, and this has been going on for days, and so your storage of gas is depleting. In that instance, that wind farm is going to happens to be blowing really hard, right? And can satisfy the reliability needs of people in states all around New Jersey. So whether you're in New Jersey, New York, or New Hampshire, you're still winning from that investment in that transmission line. You don't have to pay for New Jersey's transmission goal or policy goal, but you're still going to get economic and reliability benefits to that line. So we need to figure out a way to be smart enough. Lucky for the computing evolution, we are able to figure that out. It's not rocket science, but we need to require our utilities and our states to get on board with that so that we're ensuring we capture all of the economic and reliability benefits of new transmission investment. And then we have a few other features of the proposed rule that will help to kind of force along the selection, not force, but to get to the selection of individual transmission system projects or portfolios of projects that will help to provide that cost-effective system reliability without waiting until the last minute. And I think on that front, it's important when we think, whether it's from a country perspective or an individual state's perspective, the risk of inaction at this time, when we think about these threats that we started with, the cyber and physical threat to the grid in the US, at least, I'll speak for ourselves on that one, the extreme weather that's bearing down on the system because of climate change, the changing resource mix, and all of the economic development that's happening, the cost of not investing in this transmission, the cost of not starting now to look forward 5, 10, 15, 20 years when it comes to all of these other things before we even get to climate is pretty powerful. And so from our perspective at the Commission right now, that's the piece and the time for us to act. So that's the first of the 5-part all of government plan that we're focused on at FERC, and happy to engage in more dialogue about it after we get to hear from Sally. Thanks.
Thank you, Alison. 1.3 terawatts. That's a lot of that's a lot of watts. I thought 60 gigawatts was a lot, but anyway. So to provide a comparative discussion of how we do things on a sort of equivalent regulatory organisational basis, we have Sally McMahon from the Australian Energy Market Commission, the AEMC. Sally is an economist with more than 25 years experience in energy and industry reform programs, commencing her career investigating gas access regimes, I think gas too, not just electricity. She's been an advisor and executive with economic regulators, governments, electricity and gas businesses and investment funds in Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, Tasmania, Western Australia and Canada. So not Queensland, but Canada. Further north. Sally's held key roles in the evolution of jurisdictional energy markets and the establishment of ongoing development of law and rules of the national electricity and gas markets. In addition to her role as Commissioner at the AEMC, she's an independent chair of the Market Advisory Committee, the Gas Advisory Board and the Pilbara Advisory Committee in Western Australia. Sally holds an honours degree in economics from Flinders University and is also a member of the Economic Society of Australia and former chair of Women in Economics Network in Western Australia. So please welcome Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome everyone tonight. Now, I am going to be a little bit more scripted than Alison is, and I think you'll thank me for it because I can be accused of talking about some of these issues for hours and hours and hours. So in order to tell you what I want to say and make sure that I say it, I will refer to my iPad and provide an opportunity for Tony to interrogate me a little bit later to get into more detail about some of the things that I might want to say. And I may even need my glasses as well. So thank you for inviting me along to speak tonight. Great opportunity, and I really enjoyed meeting Alison and her team who came and visited us at the AMC in Sydney during the week and hearing about their challenges, and interesting to hear you talk about doing the simple things and the hard things, because I think on some of the simple things we're further ahead, but I think in relation, it's all relative, because I think the challenges that Alison and her team and FERC face in the US with dealing with multiple jurisdictional policies and the politics. I don't think anyone asked me what my political persuasions were when I took the role at the AMC. So it does seem kind of strange to even be declaring those things in our environment, which I am glad of, given our role as an independent body. So I don't want to be remiss and not acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today. And thank you for the opening to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people, which is the land on which I live over in Perth. So I'm freezing cold, so if I start shaking, hope you'll forgive me for that as well. So in my opening remarks, I'd like to touch on our role at the AMC, just to give some people a bit of an understanding, because I still, although I've been 25 years in the energy sector and was around when the original Australian Energy Market Agreement was established and the governance of the sector was established, still there's a lot of people that really don't understand the role of the AMC. So I'd also just want to touch on where I think we are at in the journey and some of the big issues that we've achieved, but also some of the big things that we still have to do. So in our system here in Australia, we have several what we call market bodies, which each has a distinctive role. We have the Australian Energy Market Operator, or AEMO, as we call it. Funny story about that. When it was being established, it was potentially going to be called NEMO, but we saw as the National Energy Market Operator, but that was soon put to the side for AEMO. So AEMO manages the energy system and the markets, and it works with industry effectively to keep the lights on. The Australian Energy Regulator makes revenue determinations, so they are the economic regulators for networks, and it also monitors networks, wholesale and retail market compliance with the Australian energy laws and the rules. You'll also note they're the agency that develops the default market offer. Just trying to think which jurisdictions, not in Victoria, I think. The AMC itself, which I'm a commissioner, is an independent statutory body responsible for making and reviewing the national energy rules and advising ministers. So just to give a bit of context around what the rules are, they're not legislation, they're not regulations, they essentially govern the Australian energy market. It's our job to make sure that all the bits and pieces come together and keep working effectively. We also ensure that changes are subject to appropriate governance, including consultation. I like to think of the AEMC as the steward of our energy market system. Dictionary.com defines stewardship as the responsible oversight and protection of something considered worth caring for and preserving. I know there's a lot of debate around at the moment about whether our energy market system is still working and the governance of that. But I wanted to point out that, protection doesn't mean not changing. It's quite the opposite. Protecting something that you care about really means keeping it safe from harm, but also we need to build resilience in that system so that it can change and adapt when it needs to do so. So our national energy frameworks must adapt to manage the unprecedented uncertainty and complexity of the change that's occurring in the sector, and also to harness the potential opportunities that can offer to consumers. The technical and economic characteristics of our energy system are changing as we strive to achieve our emissions targets, and the pace of change that we need is much greater than what we have experienced in the past. As service providers delivering energy and market bodies responsible for making the market work, we must work together to achieve the low-cost system that energy consumers deserve. So where are we at? Well, one of the most significant achievements that I believe in to date on the path to net zero is the inclusion of the emissions reduction targets in our energy objectives. Having worked for many, many years in the energy sector, that was one of the things that I've been most grateful for in navigating the changes in our system. This gives us the ability to formally and explicitly consider emissions reduction in our work. AEMO and the AER must also take this into account when developing the optimal development plan, and also in considering new investments and all investments actually in the network system. This year, this new tool that we have has become sharper. The Ministerial Council on Energy has released a statement which outlines a methodology and values of interim values, I should say, of emissions reduction. This gives us a tangible and quantifiable framework for taking emissions into account. It might be a small step, but it's a massive leap compared to where we've been in the past. The next challenge that we face in the road to net zero is, particularly in the energy sector, and my comments tonight are around the energy sector, as Alison's also focused on, is really to increase the contribution of low emission capacity to the NEM before coal exits. We know coal exit is inevitable. They are an ageing system. For some of you might have heard Minister Bowen speak today. The reliability of that system is deteriorating. So at some stage we needed to make a decision about it, and it will be exiting. But we must consider all opportunities to increase the low emissions capacity in the system whilst maintaining security and reliability. And the way that we are doing that is to attract and connect additional grid scale resources to the system and make more efficient use of the existing systems and capability of the NEM, or squeezing more juice, as Alison puts it, which I like. This includes utilising existing transmission and generation more efficiently and tapping into the resources that exist in households and businesses. So we've seen a lot of government intervention in our energy sector more recently. There is a gap in the economics at the moment in ensuring that we have low emissions technologies introduced into the system as coal exits. And as you heard, I also have a foot in the Western Australian market, which is its own separate market to the NEM. And they have a capacity market over there, but they're also facing the challenges of the economics of low emissions technologies, essentially because you need to overbuild these technologies in order to get the same accredited or reliable capacity into the capacity market. So we see governments are encouraging more grid scale generation through programs such as the Capacity Investment Scheme and renewable energy zones, which now exist across about 3 jurisdictions or by different names. These schemes aim to improve revenue certainty for investors and better coordinate planning and connection processes. Another really major change that we've seen in the energy sector over the last few years is the integrated system plan. It seems like it was such an obvious thing to do, but not too many years ago, we did not have a system plan. We had jurisdictional planning, and often that planning function sat within the privately owned network transmission businesses, which was a hangover from when we had publicly owned, in my view, publicly owned transmission system. So AEMO, who develops the integrated system plan, through this plan, we aim to ensure sufficient capacity. It considers the needs of the future system to deliver the generation and reliability required within government's emissions targets. The result is the optimal development plan that maximises benefits. It provides important signals and certainty to investors on what is needed, where and when. It also provides guidance on expectations regarding the future energy mix and consumer energy resources. The fact that this work is being done and a plan is developed is a significant contribution to achieving our emissions reduction objectives. However, there are many difficulties with actually delivering this plan. Increasing intermittent resources present challenges to the system's operation. The gap in economics creates uncertainty for investors who need confidence that there will be enough revenue to cover the upfront costs of their facilities out of the market. We've been looking at how we can better streamline the regulatory processes to deliver the big transmission infrastructure and the additional capacity required. Our transmission planning and investment review identified key areas to progress to clarify expectations and provide certainty around social licence issues and early works. So much as Alison's mentioned, trying to bring that planning up front so that we don't find delays and unnecessary additional costs later down the track. We outlined a vision for the future where benefits assessment for major infrastructure occurs only at the system level to reduce unnecessary processes for projects already identified in the optimal development plan, which of course the purpose of which is to see the whole, all of the pieces, the optimal jigsaw puzzle, not look at the merits of any individual project. Sorry. Benefits and downfalls of an Apple Watch. So I'll just get back to my place, sorry. So our recent financeability and concessional finance rule change will facilitate quicker investment decisions and ensure the benefits of concessional finance flow to customers. We are also looking at transmission access reform to better utilise those existing assets and provide certainty for investors. We expect that our access reforms will encourage more renewable generation where it's efficient, reducing the need for new transmission infrastructure and lowering the total cost to consumers. We've just released a consultation paper which outlines progress and next steps of implementing priority access and a congestion relief market for the transmission system. Priority access will provide an additional risk mitigation tool to encourage efficient location decisions and avoid cannibalising the value that generators expected when they originally invest. The congestion relief market will provide incentives for generators to bid more cost effectively and achieve more efficient dispatch. Moving on to consumer energy resources. We consider that energy consumers are our most valuable asset. As our chair puts it, consumers are the hero on the road to net zero. They will play a critical role in delivering our low emissions, low cost, secure, reliable and safe energy system. A significant source of low-cost, low-emission generation capacity sits with consumers and is yet to be fully utilised. We want to leverage this important resource by utilising the existing household and small business assets, investments and behaviours. Separating responsive load from non-responsive load allows us to tap into behind-the-meter assets like solar, batteries and EVs. It also enables the use of demand-side response. In February, we made a draft recommendation to better integrate flexible CER into our power system and unlock this value for consumers. Large consumers will be able to choose multiple energy service providers for their premises, and flexible consumer energy resources such as rooftop solar, batteries and electric vehicles can be metered and managed separately from more passive loads. while inbuilt measurement capability and technology such as streetlights and EV chargers can be used instead of additional meters. Consumers will benefit from different products and services, reduced consumption charges, and be rewarded with changes in behaviour and behind-the-meter investments. However, an even greater opportunity exists by making these resources visible and dispatchable. This will enable AEMO to take these resources into account more reliably when forecasting capacity needs and offer this capacity into the market. Leveraging this reduces the need for additional investment in grid-scale generation and networks, again, reducing the cost to consumers. It also enables some consumers, when they choose to, earn revenue in the market. The more consumers that participate, the more likely costs of additional infrastructure can be avoided. While there have been many achievements on this road, some challenges, or many challenges actually still remain. So I'll just talk about a few of those just quickly. Probably lost my time, but now you're very, very happy I'm scripted and not talking off cuff. One area we're about to look at is the role and opportunities of network and retail pricing reform in this transition. Pricing is arguably one of our most underutilised tools, and understandably so. It's almost universally agreed that more effective use of pricing and incentives can improve the infrastructure, location and use decisions of energy delivery service providers and consumers. However, there are many barriers to introducing an improved pricing and incentive scheme. There will be winners and losers. But managing the consumer impact and ensuring appropriate targeted support can be less costly than ignoring this valuable tool. There is much work to do to understand what pricing and incentives can do, how signals should be provided, and what we mean by more efficient tariffs anyway. The interface between network and retail tariffs is important, but do customers really need to see that complexity? This work can also guide the integration of electric vehicles so that we can start tackling this issue and their impact on the system the way we want to finish and avoid these problems in the future. We are developing terms of reference for this important piece of work, and we recognise that given the politics of pricing and the difficulties with managing impacts, we will need all stakeholders to be on this journey with us. Another key issue, and one I know Tony is very fond of, is gas, and how we transition away from national gas without putting at risk the reliability and security of the system. Gas will need to play an important role in our electricity system going forward. We also need to manage the consumer impacts such as higher costs of fuel and appliance substitution. The fact is jurisdictions are making policy decisions that will reduce the use of natural gas for households, industry and generation. But it does remain uncertain about how we'll manage this. Coal exits are really highlighting the continued need for gas-fired generation, but fewer customers will pay for these assets that will need to be maintained, at least for safety reasons. This has implications for critical industries reliant on gas, particularly where there's no viable or commercial substitute. A lot of thought is going into this, but it seems clear that we need to work together with consumers, industry, government and market bodies to develop a sensible plan with appropriate support programs to minimise customer costs and those impacts. A final challenge I just want to touch on briefly is how we use data better. This could unlock even more value from our existing assets and improve the planning for future needs. Improved access and use of data can support better decisions across the sector and by consumers. It can reduce system costs while also identifying and unlocking value for individuals. We've made some recommendations in relation to data in our smart meter review, less relevant to Victoria, of course, but an important enabler to unlock the value of consumer energy resources. And we look forward to receiving a rule change request on access to real-time data so that consumers can access the full suite of benefits that smart meters have to offer. We do want all consumers to benefit from these, from the transition, and we understand that some consumers will want to participate in the market and get the additional benefits, but we don't want people to feel like they have to or expect them to do so to deliver benefits for all consumers. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
All right, so we'll move into the panel discussion phase of this evening. So please, our distinguished guests and our distinguished friends and our distinguished colleagues, please come up. I'll briefly introduce two other speakers. Pierluigi Mancarella is a professor here at Melbourne University in Electrical Power Systems and also at the University of Manchester. Got his PhD from Politecnico di Torino, that's Turin, for those of you who don't speak Italian like me, and did his postdoc at Imperial, and has had visiting professorships at École Centrale in Lille in France, in Chile, and Tsinghua. And then Tony Wood, who has been the Energy and Climate Change Program Director at the Grattan Institute for a considerable time and is this evening's moderator. So we have a sufficiently internationally diverse panel, including a native South Australian in Tony and a native Western Australian as well, I think. So there you go. That's not international. I was being a bit cheeky there. Anyway, welcome everyone, and over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Mike. And can I also thank MEI, because this is the, we've really struggled with this idea of what we do after COVID to see if there is an appetite for Melbourne people to come out. And the evidence is there is. So hopefully this will be the first of an increasing number of these sort of events, because I know there are people who prefer to do it online and there are people interstate who feel that they miss out. But I think the benefit of having the group together and the opportunity to engage with real people far outweighs that. So we'll see how this plays out. I think what we'll talk a little bit about tonight is the similarity and the differences between the journeys we're undertaking broadly in the same direction. For me, the most obvious and most dramatic difference between the two organisations you've heard from tonight is that I can actually pronounce FERC and I cannot pronounce AEMC as a single word. In fact, Alison, if you'd said, has anyone heard of the Federal Energy Regulatory Authority? I would have said, Commission, I would have said, no, what? No. If you said, have you heard of FERC? Absolutely. It's known as FERC, right? Yeah. Whereas the AEMC is, Sally, there's one of your challenges, to change it to something that's pronounceable. So look, why don't we get into we have a little bit of a chat to start with and then open it up to the audience, because hopefully one of the benefits of being here tonight is you get a chance to ask some questions and delve into some of the stuff that's been already covered. But before we do that, Pierluigi, you've listened to both. What's your sort of immediate reactions to when you've heard about the way the two countries and the way the two bodies are thinking about this? What's your sort of core responses to that, your observations?
I think it's just like I could recognize very similar challenges in both countries, like issues such as how do you develop, for example, transmission plans considering uncertainty. It's just a huge issue around the world. There's a proactive investment in transmission grids, and then how do you actually guarantee that there will be pricing and financing mechanisms for renewables to be built in the right places and the kind of certainty of revenues, while at the same time there are huge uncertainties in the developments. I mean, it's a huge problem, and there's lots of work to be done there, I think everywhere in the world, clearly.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. I'm so interested in, Sally, you made the point, referred specifically to coal closure, and I think there might have been a general assumption that, well, in most industries, new technologies come and old technologies go, and even if they're big, they still politely or sometimes rudely leave. And yet we found in Australia, Alison, that that wasn't working out quite so well. And we've got a relatively small, as you reflected in terms of the capacity, a relatively small number of coal-fired generators, but they are still a significant part of they provide a significant part of generation. And I think it's true to say that the governments, state governments particularly, have become so concerned about this that they've directly decided they need to do something about it. And so we've seen in this state where you are this evening, the Victorian government has entered into commercial arrangements with two of the coal-fired generators to develop the Goldilocks proposal. That is, hopefully they don't close too early and they don't close too late, just at the right time. And when they do close on that very afternoon or morning, lo and behold, everything else will be there to replace them, right? So we've got this arrangement where contracts are being, or commercial arrangements are being made to try and take out some insurance effectively against a bad outcome. I guess I was interested in how the United States is approaching that. And I guess, Sally, I'd be interested in how you think that's going so far. Because we know even today, as we're speaking, it may be that the New South Wales government is negotiating an arrangement about the Eraring power station in New South Wales. But I'd be interested in how you see that, because it seems to be one of the 10, 15 years ago, no one would have expected that would be the sort of thing we'd be doing. How is the US approaching that? And Sally, I'd be interested in how you think that particular aspect is evolving. Is it going to be a good outcome?
Well, it's not going in any one particular direction. I mean, I think economically, coal is retiring and is becoming less of the generation, less of the capacity online, and less of the generation that's getting produced. We have 50 states, and 30 some of those states have clean energy policies. So in the states, the state has jurisdiction over the resource mix. So if one state wants to promote coal plants and one state wants to promote wind farms, that's their right to do. We're technology neutral as the federal regulator, just trying to keep the system reliable as the change happens. So you have a lot of states leaning in and procuring clean energy resources, and which has in those regions caused less economic coal-fired resources to retire. You have some regions of the country that remain vertically integrated, that have where the same utility owns the transmission, the distribution, and the generation. And in those places where investments have already been made and there's existing coal assets, it's a little bit of a different story. But I think in general, there's still that movement. I wish we had everybody just getting together and signing up cooperative contracts to say, you're going to stick around for a while. We're not going to need you very often, and we're going to pay you to just as much as we need to. And in some cases that happens, but it's more of an exception to the rule.
How do you view that? I mean, it's obviously not something that the AEMC initiated, but how do you see that? Is that contributing, or do you think it's an issue in terms of?
Well, I think I've been at the AMC now for just under 2 years, and prior to that, I worked for an investment fund that had investments in network assets, and have also worked in government policy, sort of looking at these issues. So I guess, there's multiple problems that are going on that all seem to be conflating. And I think where we got, and, someone that really values the rule and the governance structure that we have around the electricity market in Australia, I'm not naive to see that the states derogating from the rules is not something that you can ignore. So for a long time, I think we had a situation where not enough was happening. So even though we hadn't sort of named the problem, industry was doing what they could do because I thought it was the right thing to do. But we had a regulatory system that had a lot of barriers and clunkiness in getting investments built. We had a lot of uncertainty from investors about whether, if they invested in those things, whether they would get some return. And so there was some derogation from the states that wanted to move faster. They had different policies in their jurisdictions, which they're entitled to do, and it put in place their own, at sometimes parallel, like we saw in New South Wales with the infrastructure roadmap, the LTESs and the RESs, and we're seeing in the other jurisdictions as well. So I think that sort of was a culmination of a whole range of different problems. I think the challenge that we have at the moment is to say, well, why did those things happen? Let's try and break down the things that we can work on, like streamlining regulatory processes seems to be a pretty fundamental one. The ISP was another one. We now have more certainty about that. But the missing bit, as I mentioned in my speech, is the economics, that we're still not enabling investors to be able to see sufficient certainty in the opportunity to earn revenue in either the energy-only market, the capacity market, or essential system services markets, so that they're willing to invest. And I think that that is the gap, and we've seen government step into the gap with a few of the schemes. And I think the challenge now is to make sure that that is not the only way the market is sustainable. We need to keep advising governments on how to design those schemes so that they don't substitute or distort for the energy market system, and that it's the market system that endures beyond that gap.
So when you look beyond coal closure, it seems to me, and we published a report about this only yesterday, that talks about it as well. There are things we should be getting to now make sure this happens as well as we can, and maybe the insurance policies we're seeing in place aren't such a bad thing. But as we look past that, and we have a system which is going to be dominated, certainly in Australia, by solar and wind, with other things. Yes, Australia, probably in geological terms, is not much different from the United States in size, but our population is just a tad smaller. And our distances are much greater. So there are some differences in that sense. I guess I'm interested in, one of the things we looked at a couple of years ago was, how do you think once you get past cold closure and you really are ramping up the wind and solar, and you're thinking about, the term we used was resource adequacy. You can easily get confused between reliability and resource adequacy, but the idea that we might not have enough. It's just the market may not be delivering enough to replace coal so that we maintain a system that's there when we want it. When you turn the switch on, the energy is there. It's not because that there might have been a storm, and not because there might have been a possum in the power line. It's because basically there's not enough there when we need it. So when we looked at this, we said our conclusion was when you get to the last 10%, life gets really hard. Our view was that gas, that may be the role for gas in that system. We called it the Judi Dench role. And that is, if Judi Dench comes on the stage just for a cameo role in a play, that's enough to get the crowd in, right? That's what gas is going to do. It's not going to be there often, but when it does, it's going to be really important to keep the crowd in. So how do you see that issue? Do you think that there are other technologies? Is it going to be wind and solar with storage, but also backed up? Is storage going to be enough? Is it going to be overbuilding renewables? Is it going to be nuclear filling that gap, or hydrogen, or methane? Do you have a view about that? And I'm interested, Sally, and Pierluigi as well. How do you see that resource adequacy, last 10% Dunkelflaute challenge?
One thing I did not say in the last response is that, coal is on the decline in the U.S. That is inevitable, as Sally said it is here. 40% of our annual generation or more comes from natural gas, right? So we have, the conversation we're having about what needs to stay on is less about the coal units, more about existing gas units and whether or not there'll be new investments in gas. And that is the dialogue we are in right now in the U.S. And it's very easy to politicize these things, right? The safest thing you can say as a politician or anyone who's accountable to a politician is, we're in trouble, we got to keep everything going, and we got to do more stuff we know how to use, right? And what they mean by that is gas. And the American Gas Association is going to love knowing that they're the Judi Dench of the energy system. That's pretty hilarious. But we have the technology in the U.S. We have a very big grid. It's very geographically diverse and interconnected. You have different weather patterns across, 3 large interconnects. We can get, as proven by experience to date and every credible study out there, to 90% carbon-free electricity system with the technologies we have available to us today. But there's a lot of things we have to do. To Sally's point, it's not just making sure that we accelerate the connection, as you say it, of new wind and solar and storage. It's also ensuring that the market signals that the markets are sending the right signals for the services the grid needs. And the market design in the U.S., whether it's energy only, which we have in some regions, capacity markets and energy, which we have in some regions, or traditional vertically integrated, and by just bilateral sales, those markets were never the end in of themselves. They're a means to harness competition towards low prices for customers. And so the markets can send the right signals, but they have to evolve to do so, right? Increasingly, entry and exit from these markets across at least this eastern half of the U.S., are not driven by the market prices. They're driven by state policies, or they're driven by customers who want 100%, 365, 24 hours a day, carbon-free energy, nearer term procurements by states, by companies. And so we need to evolve the markets to ensure that they're filling the rest of the gap. It will be solar storage predominantly, with wind and offshore wind playing a big role as well.
I guess it's a hard one to communicate, because certainly we found that as soon as you start suggesting that the challenge to move towards a high renewable system isn't going to be as simple as easy as people thought, oh, that just proves we shouldn't do it. It's just too bloody hard. Just forget about it, go back to coal. And yet that's the opposite of what we should be doing. Sally, how do you see that issue in Australia I know when Audrey Zibelman was in the role at AEMO, she talked a lot about resource adequacy and dispatchable capacity and those sorts of things. How do you see it evolving in Australia? And does the market provide those signals? I guess that's what I wanted to get to.
I just think it's a hard issue, and I don't know that we actually have the answers. I think we're trying to investigate all the different options that we might have available to us and making sure that we're not just reliant or picking a winner. Long duration storage is really moving along. We've seen so many technologies move so quickly. So is there a little bit of crossing your fingers and hoping those will come? Yeah, maybe there is. But is there also sort of scratching out like the use of consumer energy resources, for example? There's the industry development side of it. Like, so how do we spur on industry and do research in technologies to keep those things moving at pace that we need to be able to substitute the new technologies for the traditional technology? So I don't really know the answer, but I don't think there's one single solution to that either. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to keep sort of identifying those new solutions and being a little bit brave and innovative in, thinking about what we need for the future, not just continuing to think about the same problems in the same way. And I think what we're trying to do at the AMC is actually tap into the industry and stakeholders more, and not assume that we're 4 commissioners now, but we will be 5 again, hopefully before the end of the year. But we don't know all of the answers, have all the technologies, and so just making sure that we are trying to use all the avenues of getting industry expertise and knowledge, getting consumers to tell us what they need and what they want. Leaning into AEMO's role, what are they seeing? How do we identify these things before they're upon us better in the future? So I don't have the answers, Tony.
Okay. Pierluigi, have you got the answer? I think this is an area I know you've thought about a lot, right?
Yeah,
And while Claire is just answering that question, you might want to think about what your questions might be.
Academics always have got an answer, yes. Well, I think, technology-wise, it will really depend on how we will evolve. Obviously, we're going to have in Australia economy that somehow will start involving seriously hydrogen, then we might consider that particularly in terms of long duration storage. But it really depends on how the whole system evolves. But if you don't go into technology, just look at what the market would do. There's a big problem. In fact, in the AMC is very active. There have been the last 2 or 3 years discussions with Reliability Panel try to understand with an energy-only market, with the current mechanism that we have with the reliability standard, average unserved energy, is the right way of doing it? Do we need to change perhaps the form of the standard, and maybe we should go look more into extreme events? Because once you start having still a very flexible assets in the future, like storage, and consumer energy resources, there will be lots of storage in electric vehicles and so on. The kind of average reliability problem can be solved through flexibility. But how are you going to solve the problem of the Dunkelflaute, for example? If that becomes material, say there is no wind, no solar energy for 1 week or 2 weeks, then how do you solve that? Do you have gas plants in reserve? Do you use hydrogen long duration storage? This technologically, there are these options, but can the market deliver? And it's still work in progress. We have proposed this. I have proposed something myself, how things could be changed. Now, can it be really applied to a market, or perhaps it is better to ask the government somehow to provide a kind of insurance when it comes to the last 10% or 5% that you were mentioned before?
Right.
I think that is bigger than what the market can do. It's really problem of energy policy in a way.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that, because I probably didn't touch on the markets, but I think our view would be that the market is not broken; it's just bent, to quote. I think everybody knows. But so there will be some refinements that we need to make to the market to make it better equipped for the new technology and the changing economics and operation of the system. But there is also an ongoing role of government. I mean, I don't think that the Australian energy market system was ever established thinking that government would no longer play a role ever, that the markets would provide. I mean, we need regulation and we need government intervention when the market will not provide. And I think the trick is picking when you can do that so that you're not making distortionary decisions or introducing new problems that will need to be resolved later.
Okay. There's lots of other issues we can touch upon, but why don't we leave it there and see what you would like to talk about and hear from our three panelists. And we've got, so bear with me, we've got two roving microphones. I would ask that if you could identify what your affiliation is, if you have one, and also prefer not to have speeches, but prefer questions if that's at all possible. And I think the gentleman with the, I won't abuse you by saying the people with the white hair, Tom, but the gentleman with the lightish coloured hair in the middle there.
Thank you, Tony. Tom Fricke. Tony, you mentioned about the last 10% being hard to perhaps grapple with, and that's where gas might play a role once we're phased totally out of coal. But if we want to then actually eventually phase out of gas for that last 10% and some robust, reliable energy that will continue to generate, perhaps this is where nuclear might come in if we wanted to phase totally out of gas. So I'm interested in Alison's view on, in the US where you've got a lot of coal, obviously, but a lot of gas, but you do have some nuclear as well. What role do you see in the US for nuclear as a generation mechanism that perhaps handles the last 10% that Tony referred to, and therefore in Australia, if we went down that path, that would enable us potentially to phase gas out totally in the longer term?
I should warn you, this is a nuclear question.
I got that.
Right.
The U.S. has about 95 gigawatts of existing nuclear power online. Most of it was built in the 70s or over 30 years ago. We just had one kind of painful process of a new reactor getting built down in Georgia. And so there's a little bit of new nuclear, but there has been a change in perspective on the role that existing fleet should play in a zero carbon future. There have been incentives and subsidies provided at the state level and now at the federal level to value the zero carbon attribute of the production of that nuclear power. When it comes to what technology is going to provide the last 10%, a few thoughts. One is, long duration storage is coming down in price very quickly. We're talking about 100-hour storage. And so to my mind, that's the competitor with advanced nuclear. Advanced nuclear has a long way to go from a commercial perspective, and it's not clear when or if it will be commercially viable, even with a significant government support, which is now happening in the US. It's also 2024, right? And we have target carbon emission reduction targets or greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for 2030 and 2050. And it feels very soon. It is very soon, but we have things to do in the meantime while that is playing out. There is a lot we can do through transmission investment, through making our system more efficient, through reducing barriers to the participation of consumer energy resources in the markets. And so there's lots to do in the meantime while we see where that is gonna take us.
And we'll be watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gentlemen in the front.
I wonder, is hydro completely off the table? There's a lot of discussion about it, particularly in small hydro setups. And I found it a very elegant solution because there's no new technology. You need a bulldozer to dig a dam at the top of a hill and then just electric motors and solar to pump it back up.
There you go. In the US, there's a lot of existing hydro power. There's a lot of non-powered dams that could be changed to produce electricity. And I think, hydro is everybody's kind of like favorite second cousin. You just forget to be excited about what it's providing to our system already. There's a lot of opportunity for technology development in the small hydro side that I think is really exciting. And again, the revenue streams haven't been there relative to the technology development. So we're not forgetting about it. Certainly in our existing hydro facilities, our big dams that the commission regulates are all coming up at the end of their 30-year licenses. So it's kind of a time of renewal on that front as well.
I'm not sure that I'm the right person to ask about that. I think at the end of the day, nothing's off the table from the AMC's perspective. It's really about what industry can deliver, what can be economic, or what can be supported by the systems that we already have. So, yeah, you might have something more to offer on that.
I agree. It's like, if the economics will decide, if it makes sense economically, it's something we know very well. So it will certainly be built, but also it's big infrastructure, and it's got lots of other things around building hydro, pumped hydro, and we have clear evidence, that nothing is easy, and at what cost we should build pumped hydro is not very clear either. So again, if the economics is there, it will be built, but it's a big thing to build.
Gentlemen, next to, yes, there.
Thank you. I noticed, Tony, that FERC pronunciation is just one syllable, but if you want to call it AMIC, it would be 2 syllables. So it's still a problem. I would like to ask a elephant in the room question, and I would like to hear opinion of all 4 panelists, and I would like to request you to be mindful of and avoid groupthink on this question. It's a good panel, 1 academic, 1 think tanker, and 2 regulators. So the question is, Ahmed Faruqi, the prominent economist in US, and Professor Eddie Lieberman, now late, were started to becoming of the view that the whole market liberalization is failing or has already failed. So what is your take on that?
What has been? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The old market structure has failed. Okay.
I think I'm unfamiliar with the term market legalization. I think that's the.
Market liberalization, yeah.
So by that, I mean the creating wholesale markets and later deregulating distributors and transmitters and everybody. And then as a result, the prices have inclined so much that we think that the old days of vertically integrated industry, government owned, were great.
I know Ahmed and have worked with him on various projects. I mean, I think so again, there's this patchwork of regulation in the US where you've got at the state level, some restructured competitive markets, some vertically integrated markets. And then at the federal overlay, you also have some additional competitive regional organized markets through these RTOs and ISOs, the grid operators who then also run the markets. The markets have done a very good job over the last 30 years of doing what they were designed to do, which is lower cost for customers. I can tick off lots of stats about why I believe that to be true and why lived experience shows us that. But if to the extent they're going to keep going, I don't think they're dead. I think they have to evolve. Sally said they're bent, not broken. I think depending on where you are in the US, we're doing things in the markets like more accurately accrediting capacity so that we understand at a more granular level kind of what value different types of resources are actually bringing to the system and how that changes as you add more variable resources to the system over time. So I think again, it's not the market isn't the end; it's the way there, and I think it can continue to succeed, not independent of government intervention, but as a mechanism to continue to keep costs low and maintain reliability. It's just it has to evolve to keep up with what's actually happening on the system.
Sorry?
This won't be an AMC view. This will be my view. I think if what I'm understanding is that essentially there's the current structure working for us, and I guess I was quite lucky as a graduate economist to fall into the development of national competition policy here in Australia, which again I think it was a huge landmark document and framework to establish the underpinnings of many of our reforms. But that was all about introducing competition where competition could be effective and thrive in order to reduce cost to consumers and improve our international competitiveness. But regulating where it was necessary for access and minimising essentially short-term gouging of customers where they really couldn't change their behaviour or change away from the product. So I think those fundamentals are still, I can still believe in those fundamentals. But I think what we're seeing is the blurring between the lines between wholesale, network, retail in this market, right? And the technology those lines and the way we are perceiving opportunities are really challenging the segregation. I spoke this morning about being really careful when we're making rules going forward that we don't reinforce those artificial or those barriers that once made sense with the economics but may no longer. So we should be talking about energy delivery systems as opposed to, you know, wholesale, network and retail, and think about how things like customer protections and retail services, what they look like in our new market and what we need to do to ensure that customers retain those protections, even if those barriers are not the same. So I guess fundamentally the competition versus protection of consumers through regulation and government intervention, I believe in that. But if we go, should we still retain the wholesale network, retail, customer protection kind of segregation? I think that should follow the economics and the technology that we're using to deliver those services.
Luigi, you have a view on that?
Yeah, obviously there are lots of discussions around this. The reality is that we don't know what would have happened in the past 20 years if we had a kind of centralized old style system. Maybe we would never have a like big Tesla battery, for example, because things would not have happened and somehow innovation would not have happened to deliver those kind of technologies. We just don't have a counterfact to say that. Now, to say that. Of course, there are discussions and there are serious challenges to the way the things are happening, particularly look at price formation with renewables and then how do you guarantee, again, you know, revenues and certainty and so on. No? But a market is always what we build. You know, it's not a market as given, you know, from above. So certainly we can build markets with like appropriate regulatory and energy policy framework that can deliver on a job. And I agree that so far not done relatively well. It's just that the challenges ahead require changing things in a way that we're not sure about, but it can be done. And again, we don't know what would have happened in a different way. We don't have that counterfact.
The question you've raised is one of the most significant we have ahead of us to answer. And we're not really answering it. What we're doing is muddling through a mess, which is a bit of both. I'm not sure that's a great way to do this. I think the markets that we put in place worked fine, but we didn't maintain them. And we had this toy that were given to by our predecessors and we've been throwing it against the wall and breaking it. Now we think we want a new one. Well, why don't you just fix the one you got, right? There are things about these markets that are perfectly fine and need to be protected, but there are things that have to evolve and we haven't looked after that and evolved that market to be able to do some of the challenges. And right now, in the next little while, it's even worse because we've got so many interventions. Our view was, for God's sake, let these things play through because trying to fix them in the short term is not going to work. Let's think a bit more broadly. And governments, in our view, governments must take the lead on this. What's the role of governments and markets? I mean, markets are delicate beasts and they have to be designed and regulated properly. And even though I think the three market bodies that we have in Australia have a fundamentally important role to play, they shouldn't lead this because it's A, they've got a vested interest, and B, the politicians will reject it again if they do. And that's what happened last time. The politicians of our government leaders have to make some core decisions, then hand it over to the market. This is what we want. Now we need you to implement it. I think that's the way we might fix this. But that's one where I'm not particularly optimistic, to be honest, that we're going to end up in that space. I think this might be almost the last question, but thank you.
Thanks. Rod Keenan, loosely associated with the University of Melbourne. So we heard Alison talk a bit about the increasing demand for energy associated with the IRA and onshoring of manufacturing. Here we've had a lot of talk about a massive increase in renewable energy demand associated with producing green steel and green products. So Ross Garnaut from the Superpower Institute is one who's been talking up those sorts of things. So are the sort of market operators thinking about these potential large-scale increases in demand for renewable energy, or are they out there in the long term, the sort of too hard basket at the moment?
The increase in demand is a very new topic in the last 6 months in the US and is a result of the combination of this Inflation Reduction Act that passed in 2022 and is now starting to bear fruit, which was as much an industrial policy as it is a climate focused policy, as well as the speed at which data centers and the country's hunger for artificial intelligence and computing power are all coming together at the same time. The way it's playing out right now is just that the demand is increasing in that part of the conversation, not necessarily the clean energy demand. Although, of course, when you think about who the companies are who are providing those services, they are asking for and want to have renewable energy, right? Already in the planning time frame, with the commission right now, the transmission rule I talked about intends to contemplate what that future demand looks like, and the reality that it's not FERC that's choosing what kind of units want to hook up to provide power or what kind of demand wants to be more dynamic. It's just what's happening. And so you have to plan for the reality of the future. So we are capturing it in that sense. But this new kind of near term, the sky is falling, demand is skyrocketing. Yes, demand is increasing, but it's not increasing everywhere in the country. It's increasing in certain areas where data centers are getting together. It's increasing in places where the chip manufacturing facilities and the new battery components facilities are wanting to interconnect. What we're seeing very quickly is a changing attitude around transmission. Before it was, oh, these clean energy states, they want transmission for their policies. All of a sudden it is, wow, if I want that manufacturing plant to move to my state instead of the state next door, there has to be a reliable room on my system for them to interconnect. That's becoming a really important issue.
I'm by background, Irish Catholic by background. And when someone says the IRA, I think of a terrorist organization. And my grandfather actually was a member of that particular terrorist organization. There are well-respected economists in this country who would say that the US IRA is also a terrorist organization in an economic sense. And we'll see how that plays out. And Sally, you mentioned briefly some of the connected challenges about demand, because we've seen flat demand in Australia since about 2014, but now we are seeing these signs. And you mentioned yourself, integration of electric vehicles, the degasification of the gas load, those sort of things. So we are going to, I don't think we've yet seen it clearly, but the whole issue of the data centers and so forth as growing demand. So we could see that's going to have, coping with that as well as dealing with what we've got today is going to be a big challenge. I'm assuming, has anybody else got one last question? Thank you.
Hi, Tony. Noel Dunlop. Quick question. You talked about the last 10% networks being integrated, but one thing that I'd like to understand a bit further, if you can, both in the US and Australia, is how we actually deal with poles and wires falling down. And so the last two major blackouts, one in South Australia and one in Victoria, happened not because of the power availability. It was because we've got such a long distributed network, which was centralized at one stage, try to feed power. So how are you looking at decentralizing power, and how are you looking at that to overcome that as well as the last 10%?
I think Australia is well ahead of the US when it comes to the influence of decentralized power in providing value to the system. We've been pretty impressed, more than pretty impressed this week, as we're thinking, how can this possibly have so much penetration, and how are they fixing all the pieces so that you all are able to get the value that these consumer energy resources are providing for reliability services purposes in particular, and resource adequacy. It's pretty impressive. So we don't, out in the Western US, we have long skinny lines as well. But I'm not sure. I think the comparison to, are we thinking about distributed? Yes, we're behind you. The things we are doing at the wholesale level is trying to open up the markets to what we call distributed energy resources and demand response. But that's a slow process, and you have to set up frameworks. You can only make rules so stringent as people can get comfortable with to set up these frameworks. So we're at a starting point, but there's a lot more to do in terms of integrating distributed energy resources
on that front. There's also a lot of work going on.
Ellie, do you have anything?
I just think with how to deal with big infrastructure that falls over. You know, I guess there's two elements to that. Is one, sort of how do you build into the framework how resilient that infrastructure is, and spending on resilience of the physical assets, I guess. And at the end of the day, there's a limit to how much you want to spend on that to avoid those 1 in 100-year events, which may well be increasingly less than one in 100 or more times in 100 years. So there's that sort of part of it, which is what's around the reliability standard, and what are we building for? The AUR is doing some work in looking at in their value of reliability. They're also thinking about how do you value resilience in our systems, particularly facing more and more climate impacts. So it could be an economic problem, but it's also an IT or tech problem in looking at how quickly you can heal networks or repair networks or circumvent networks, or just move energy around the system in different ways. So there's sort of that side of it. And then you talk about the distributed side of it. Well, you could go west. The west is actually a really good, I don't want to say melting pot, sand pit for looking at different ways of doing things. So, they do a lot, and, they have the benefit of having government ownership of just about every part of the energy delivery system. Not that means they all get along or work together on everything, just by the way, but Horizon Power does some great work in looking at disconnected microgrids, and there's a lot more standalone power systems. There's a lot of work going into rethinking about replacing those really, really long lines out into, the West is quite a large state. But how do you do that differently? So standalone power systems and disconnected microgrids are certainly being looked at. I think recently in one of the big storms that they had in Western Australia, Western Power actually looked to how would they get these transmission lines into the country in time to get these, and they discovered and decided that it would be a lot quicker and more efficient and effective to actually build them themselves. So this is another thing I think we can look at, is how do we stimulate industry, or what industries do we need to stimulate to support the future energy system? So, and that's across the, hydrogen, green energy exports, moving into new technologies, which I know are some favourite topics of probably some of the people in the room. So
there's plenty of reasons why we'll have more of these forums, I think, as well. 7:30, we said we'd get you out by 7:30. Michael.
Thanks, Tony. I would like to thank our two guests, and Tony and Pierluigi, for coming along this evening and sharing your thoughts. The US is a tremendously, we know, US is a tremendously large and diverse country, and even the people who worry about electricity every day, the heterogeneity of how things operate in a regulatory and technical sense in the United States, from Seattle to Miami, and let alone the other diagonal, and Alaska and Honolulu and Hawaii, and is tremendously diverse. So some of these markets, they don't have markets in some regions, others are right through to very similar structures, like in Texas to Australia. So the laws of physics for the power system apply, but they have tornadoes, and they're having tornadoes at the moment. It's tornado season in the US at the moment. So we have tornadoes and hurricanes, extreme cold in that famously cold place called Texas, which, so the physical changes, the diversity of markets, I think is a really rich opportunity for Australians to learn from how America broadly is regulated and functions. So I think, the more we can discuss how we do things differently, how we do things the same, and what we can commonly share, I think is a really huge opportunity for Australia, and hopefully a significant opportunity for American guests as well. So thank you all. Thanks for coming along. Lovely, great crowd tonight. Good numbers, and hope we all learnt good things. I wish you all farewell. Good evening.